The next bill on the calendar for the day is House File 42. The clerk will report the bill.
House File number 42, number 3 on the calendar for the day, an act relating to public safety, amending definitions of labor trafficking, the first engrossment.
I recognize the member from Ramsey, the author of the bill, Representative Feist, to explain the bill.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This bill was developed in collaboration between the Hennepin County Attorney's Office, the Advocates for Human Rights, and labor trafficking experts. The goal with these changes is to address some glaring holes in our existing statutes that enable perpetrators to evade the law. The bill also enhances penalties in labor trafficking scenarios where the victim is under the age of 18 and the trafficking occurs for an extended period of time, or the victim suffers great bodily harm or death. And to proactively answer a question that some of you may have, we are not eliminating blackmail from the statute. We are just redefining it as reputational harm later on. This bill also clarifies that the updated definitions of debt bondage and forced labor or service in the labor trafficking statutes also apply to those terms as they are used in the aggravated sex trafficking statutes, per the recommendation of the Minnesota Sentencing Guidelines Commission. This bill is supported by the Bureau of Criminal Apprehension, labor advocates, and experts as an important update to existing labor trafficking laws.
There is an amendment at the desk. The clerk will report the amendment.
O'Neill moves to amend House File number 42, the first engrossment. The amendment is coded A2.
I recognize the author of the amendment, the member from Wright, Representative O'Neill, to explain the amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. First, I want to thank Representative Feist because this is something that we don't talk about a lot on the House floor, but something that we should be talking about a lot on the House floor. And when anyone is entrapped in sex trafficking and labor trafficking, it is a horrendous thing. Absolutely horrendous for that person. And let me just tell you, the last time I looked at Polaris, which is the national data for those that are sex trafficked, you would be shocked at the statistics. The average age of a boy first entering sex trafficking is 12 years old. 12 years old. The average age of a girl entering sex trafficking is just 13 years old. 13. The life expectancy for that 12-year-old and that 13-year-old is 5 years. That's according to the Polaris. 5 years. We have 5 years to find them and rescue them and hopefully give them back a life. So, Representative Feist, I could not thank you more for making this so incredibly serious. And it absolutely needs to be discussed. And you know, I've given speeches on the House floor before about the buyers of sex trafficking and the users of labor that is trafficked. And that's really also the impetus of what is the problem, is because we tolerate that in our society. I'm not going to go into that, but I am going to talk about increasing and adding mandatory minimums onto this bill, because I think it's that serious. And what this amendment would do, what the A2 amendment would do, would be to add a mandatory minimum of 10 years for first-degree sex trafficking and 12 years for an aggravated first-degree sex trafficking. Remember, I just told you that if this 12-year-old or this, and that's average, there are, you know, people, there are infants that are sex trafficked, infants, toddlers, small children that are sex trafficked each and every day in this nation. And a person doing that deserves a mandatory minimum sentence of 10 years and aggravated, which means that they have done it over and over and over for 12 years. And I would say that those mirror what we did in first-degree sexual conduct, criminal sexual conduct statutes. So, you know, Representative Moeller and I worked for quite some time on reforming the criminal sexual conduct statutes. And I was kind of an unofficial member of the criminal sexual conduct statutory working group. I wasn't an official member, but I was at every meeting and I had a lot to say. And it was so important that we reformed the sexual assault statute so that they worked for victims. And likewise, this is so incredibly important that we reform these statutes to work for the victims of sex and labor trafficking. I could not support this bill more. I hope that you see this as a friendly amendment. It literally just mirrors first-degree sexual conduct statutes that we just changed a little over a year ago. And with that, I ask for your green vote, and I'll ask for a roll call, please.
Representative O'Neill has requested a roll call vote on the amendment. Seeing 15 hands, there will be a roll call vote. Is there any discussion to the amendment? I recognize the member from St. Louis, Representative Olson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise to a point of order under House Rules 4.05.
Representative Olson, please state your point of order.
My point of order is such that there is a creation of a mandatory minimum, which creates a prison bed, which would increase the spending in this bill, which according to 4.05 would mean that this is out of order, and I hope you find my point of order well taken.
Members, is there any advice to the Olson point of order? I recognize the member from Wright, Representative O'Neill.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, I would argue that if we're going to do this, we certainly are going to add to prison beds, I hope, because that's really the concern, that we're adding to prison beds. And I don't have the fiscal note in front of me. Maybe Representative Feist knows more than I do about that, but yeah, so I would really hope that we could see that this is actually in part of the bill, that it's really important that even if it is, if there is a fiscal note, this would, I mean, if it changed, it would be so very small. I think it could be something that the DOC could probably absorb, but they're not here to say that. I wish we could have done this in committee, but unfortunately we did not get this done in committee. So we're doing, just like many other times, we're doing work here on the floor instead. Mr. Speaker, I hope you find that. Thank you. It was distracting. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
I recognize the member from Olmsted, Representative Quam.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Members, this actually would decrease the cost, because when we show we're serious about punishment for horrible crimes, that will decrease in Minnesota. So, frankly, I would hope the Speaker would take the advice that actually it would save money and therefore it would be fine.
I recognize the member from Carver, Representative Nash.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, members, let me frame it this way. The bill itself is already establishing this as a crime, and what Representative O'Neill's amendment is doing is saying that there is a mandatory minimum that comes along with the fact that you are creating this as a crime. So this is a fairly self-evident amendment. If we're going to create a crime, there have to be consequences to that crime. Representative O'Neill's amendment is saying that there should be a mandatory minimum of that crime, and you're already going to be adjudicating these people. You're already going to be having the conversation about what does this crime do. This amendment, the O'Neill amendment, actually creates mandatory minimum sentences that are going along with the crime that Representative Feist is creating, that Representative O'Neill is actually saying that she supports. And what we're trying to get done is saying that when these people perpetrate these horrible crimes on children, that we should be locking them up for at least a prescribed period of time. And I am disappointed that we're trying to rule this out of order instead of just taking a vote. Mr. Speaker, thank you.
I recognize the member from Isanti, Representative Johnson.
Mr. Speaker, members, if you actually look at the fiscal note, there's only 2 people during a 10-year time span that was ever charged on this type of offense, which is unfortunate. In the fiscal note, it says they can absorb the costs. So this should be no problem. Members, if you don't think there's sex trafficking or child sex trafficking in your district, you need to look again, because it's in every single county of this state. It's all over this country. They're very difficult to catch and deal with and prosecute. But when we do, we need to punish them to the full extent as possible. Now, what's interesting, you're complaining about putting a mandatory minimum sentence because it might cost money on somebody who will do irreparable damage to our kids. But in committee, we hear about you talking about raising the civil penalties on business owners to make sure they comply. You can't have it both ways. Let's get these people that do irreparable harm to our kids off the streets and into prison where they belong.
I recognize the member from Ramsey, Representative Pinto.
Mr. Speaker, advice. Mr. Speaker, this this amendment does not relate to a new crime, Mr. Speaker. This is a pre-existing crime that already has a presumptive prison sentence. So that part's clear. Somebody commits this crime, presumptive prison sentence. The only thing is that the amendment adds a number of months to that sentence. Representative O'Neill's right that in some cases it might be actually only be a few months. I think in one case it'd be like additional 6 months. But in another case it'd be additional 20 or so months. In any case, Mr. Speaker, it does in fact cost money for people to be in prison longer than they would have anyway. This is not about a new crime created in this bill. This is about a pre-existing crime and simply adding some number of months, which costs money. It is perfectly appropriate to rule it out of order under 4.05. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
I recognize the member from Anoka, Representative Niska.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Advice members, as Representative Pinto just correctly pointed out, this is an existing crime. It is a very serious crime. It is a crime that I would hope, I think we all would hope, our district court judges are already going to take very seriously in sentencing. All this amendment does is make sure that there aren't some district court judges that don't treat it as seriously as it should. And in those cases, again, remember, we are talking about a prospective sentencing law. So we're talking about crimes that are going to be sentenced in the coming year, at least, in the future, and that at the end of what should hopefully already be a lengthy prison sentence, that there may, in a few cases, be some additional time. So yes, it's possible that in 2030 or 2031 or some year off in the future, there might be some hypothetical future additional cost that is not the type of budget cost that we should be ruling out of order as a matter of parliamentary procedure on this floor today, just as a way for people not to take a tough vote on something that we should be voting
Mr. Speaker.
on. Mr.
Speaker.
Representative Pinto, for what purpose do you rise?
Point of order, Mr. Speaker.
State your point of order, Representative Pinto.
I believe that the member is impugning motives, and that is not prohibited. That is not permitted on the House floor, Mr. Speaker.
I'll remind members of Mason's 24.1. In the debate, a member must confine their remarks to the question before the House and avoid personalities. Representative Niska, please confine your remarks to Representative Olson's point of order. Representative Niska.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Absolutely, the point of order should not be well taken, because this is the type of thing that our House rules should allow us to vote on. It's a germane amendment. It's an amendment that if it does impose any cost, it's something hypothetical, far off in the future. Our rules should allow us to actually vote on the merits of this amendment, Mr. Speaker, and that's all I was saying. Please I urge you to find the point of order not well taken.
Members, I will remind the body that we are debating Representative Olson's point of order under House Rule .405. I recognize the member for Isanti, Representative Dowd.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to offer you some advice in the ruling. This is, and pay attention here, members. The point of order is on Rule 4.05, okay, which says that, and if you want to read it, you can, which says that it would be out of order if it raised the spending in the base. In this underlying bill, folks who are convicted under this particular section of law would be convicted of a violent felony and would receive a sentence under that. I'm told that it could vary slightly from this, but it should be a sentence according to sentencing guidelines of at least 5 years or 60 months, okay? So 60 months is well beyond this budget cycle and the next budget cycle and even one more after that. And never in the history of this chamber have we called something out of order that didn't have a budget impact in the current biennium or the tails, okay? And I think this rule actually even just says spending in the current biennium, okay? This would not have any additional spending until beyond 60 months and only in the term of 60 months out to 120 or 144 months. So, Mr. Speaker, pay very close attention, read the rule. There is no increased cost in this biennium or the next because of this amendment, okay? So very clearly, this is not a violation of Rule 4.05, and we need to be very concise and precise about how we read these rules and how we rule things out of order. So I understand that folks may think this has some cost, and it may, but there would be no cost until after 60 months, because that's the point at which these folks, you're talking about sentencing somebody, Mr. Speaker, for a term instead of 60 months as a minimum, now you'd be 120 months. So there'd be no cost to the state for the term less than 60 months. Would only add on beyond 60 months. So unfortunately, this rule does not apply to this point of order, and I'd ask you to find the point of order not well taken.
I recognize the member from Stearns, the Minority Leader, Representative Damath.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And just offering advice. The fiscal note came back as 0. This is not a prop. I'm just referring to the fiscal note. It came back as 0. And we are redefining something in this bill. The underlying, or the amendment that is being offered by Representative O'Neill, and thank you for offering this, Representative O'Neill. The amendment that's being offered is talking about mandatory minimums. So, Mr. Speaker, I would ask that you would take this into consideration as you rule. There is no cost on the fiscal note, which then on the amendment, there would be no cost on that. And that is my advice to you, Mr. Speaker.
I recognize the member from St. Louis, Representative Olson.
Thank you. I offer advice. I just wanted to clarify for members to read Rule 4.05. It does not specifically say spending in base. It said the amendment would increase the spending or spending base. It never does it say biennium. So I hope that you find my point of order well taken, as we heard numerous members from the GOP mention the cost associated with this amendment.
Members, I have reviewed the bill, the amendment, and Rule 4.05. I have considered advice from Representative Olson, Representative O'Neill, Representative Quam, Representative Nash, Representative Johnson, Representative Pinto, Representative Niska, Representative Doubt, and Representative Damath, and I find that the point of order is well taken.
Mr. Speaker.
Representative Nash.
Mr. Speaker, I would appeal the ruling of the Speaker and request a roll call.
Representative Nash appeals to the ruling of the Speaker and requests a roll call vote. Seeing 15 hands, there will be a roll call on the appeal. Members, the question before us is, shall the decision of the Speaker stand as the judgment of the House? Any discussion? Representative Nash.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm not sure that our side could make this more abundantly clear. So there is a crime that is being created already. And we are saying that we want a mandatory minimum to go along with that crime, so that, as Representative Niska pointed out, a judge that is perhaps more or less capricious than another judge could say, well, it's not that big of a deal. When you are sex trafficking children, that's a big deal. And Mr. Speaker, I don't know that I have enough quietness in the chamber, if you would. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Members, this is a once again, self-evident amendment. This says that if you perpetrate this crime, there are mandatory minimum penalties that go along with this. And I respect the Ways and Means Chair, I really do. But this is a vote I think you want to take. You should take this vote. So, Mr. Speaker, I believe that this is something that, with a 0 fiscal note, as Leader Damath pointed out, a 0 fiscal note already, how can extending that have a greater than 0 fiscal impact? Once again, thank you. Vote red on appealing the ruling of the Speaker.
Further discussion to the appeal of the ruling of the Speaker. Representative Dowd, are you seeking recognition? I recognize the member from Isanti, Representative Dowd.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. I certainly appreciate Representative Olson, or Chair Olson's perspective on this. We have never, I mean, there's, where do I start? We have never, ever, even our forecast doesn't pick up anything beyond the tails of the tails. Like, to say that there's some, first of all, there's no cost. I'll start with that. The fiscal note on the bill, there's no cost, okay? Then, if there was a cost, it would be out beyond 60 months, which we have never, ever even recognized. And you know, I'll be talking about that, I'm sure, more, because I'm sure that $17 billion probably won't be enough, and we're going to see spending crop up in the tails and the tails of the tails, so that because we can't get enough of it in this budget cycle, and I'm just going to guess that I'm going to see that in bills that are going to come here to the House floor. But I'll also maybe ask Representative Olson if she would yield for a question.
Representative Olson will yield for a question. Representative Dowd.
Representative Olson, that paragraph that you referenced, and I think it was, I wasn't paying attention at the very beginning of this, but I think you rose to a point of order under 4.05 amendment limits, that this thing spent money and that therefore should be out of order. But Representative Olson, if you could read for me in our rule book on 4.05, that first paragraph on 4.05, the very last sentence that starts with this rule, if you could read that for us.
Representative Olson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I didn't hear a question in asking to be yielded, but I will say that what I did hear was both saying that the fiscal note, that there was no cost, but yet somehow also describing costs in the tails, and I wonder how we could have it both ways on that.
Representative Dowd.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'll read it since the chair didn't necessarily want to, and I'll have a follow-up question for her after I read it for the body. But the last sentence of that 4.05 says, this rule is only in effect when a budget resolution adopted under Rule 4.03 is not in effect. Okay? So, but this is an important issue that we shouldn't let go here on the House floor. We can't misuse this rule and abuse this rule by calling everything that we want to out of order. Okay? So I'm sure that we're going to see a budget resolution soon. I think we're hoping for that. We've already seen $1.5 billion worth of new spending come off of the House floor. It's a little more than that. I think we're going to see some more today. Over $1.5 billion go off the House floor, and we still don't have a budget resolution. But never in the history of this. So we have a fiscal note with zero cost for the bill. And I'm not saying there is a cost. I wasn't the one that said it. And I appreciate, Representative Olson, that you think there might be a cost, and you referenced that other people said it. You're the one who said there was a cost. I did not. I said if you think there's a cost, then it wouldn't be out beyond 60 months, which we in this chamber have never recognized. And we've never called something out of order because it had spending in the tails. And I am going to remind you of this conversation today. It's going to haunt you, because I guarantee you're going to have spending in the tails of the tails in your bills. And I'm going to remind you about that. But you don't think it should be, it should have any impact here. First of all, there's no spending. Second, if there was spending, it doesn't happen until at least beyond 60 months, because we're extending the sentence, and the sentencing guideline says it's at least 60 months for a violent felony, and this amendment says it would go to 120 or 144. So that's the time, if there was a cost, that's the time it would be incurred. And that doesn't get recognized in our budgeting here in the state of Minnesota, okay? And this rule does not and has never in the history of this chamber applied to that. And I'd warn you against setting a new precedent on that particular issue. So, members, this is really clear. I understand that when you have enough votes, you can do whatever you want, but you got a bunch of people on this side of the aisle who want to work with you, who want to, and we understand that we're not in the majority. But you know what? We still have election certificates. And we want to actually make a difference for our constituents. And we want to be part of the process. So let us help you do that. If you don't like our amendment, vote it down. But let's actually debate the amendment, have a conversation about the amendment, and consider it. I think Minnesotans at home appreciate that, and they want that kind of respect. Don't call it out of order on something. I mean, there's 5 different reasons this thing's not out of order. But for some reason, you don't want to debate it and don't want to vote on it. Just show a little respect to the other people in this chamber who also have an election certificate who think this issue is very important. And if you don't want to increase the minimum sentences for violent felons, then vote against it. It's okay. That's a perfectly acceptable, I wouldn't vote that way, but if you want to, you can. Perfectly acceptable. You have your own election certificate. But please don't trample on ours. It's our opportunity to offer an amendment on these bills on this House floor and debate the issues. And Minnesotans deserve, and we should respect their right and their entitlement to have that debate here on the House floor. So, you obviously have the votes and you can do whatever you want, but at some point you gotta say, gosh, there should be a limit. We should treat each other with a little more respect. So this very obviously isn't out of order. It never has been in the chamber in the history of this. It isn't now. And don't use the extra votes that you have to trample on those who don't have enough votes. You make a big deal about standing up for the minority, but you trample on it every chance you get. Don't do that today. Let's actually work together. And if you don't like the idea, just vote it down. You've got the votes. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
I recognize the member from Stearns, the Minority Leader, Representative Demuth.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I'm wondering if Representative Olson would yield for a question.
Representative Olson will yield for a question. Representative Demuth.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Representative Olson, on the underlying bill, do you know what the average prison sentence for this crime would be?
Members, please take your conversations off of the House floor into the alcoves or into the retiring room. I recognize the member from St. Louis, Representative Olson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. No, I do not.
Representative Demuth.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm wondering if Representative Olson would yield for one more question.
Representative Olson will yield for a question. Representative Demuth.
Representative Olson, do you know how many people are in prison for this crime?
I recognize the member from St. Louis, Representative Olson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. No, I do not. But I would just remind the body that custom and usage under 4.05 for mandatory minimums has been well-founded under 4.05 in the past.
Representative Demuth.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you, Representative Olson. Members, as you are voting to overturn the ruling of the Speaker, and I ask that you would vote to overturn the ruling of the Speaker, as I've looked at the fiscal note, it says that on page 7 that it is expected, the cost is expected to be minimal. So we know that we are already talking about the crime. What we are talking about here is the mandatory minimum, not an increase in number that is unknown. It is expected to be minimal according to the fiscal note. So we're not talking about adding more people in. What we're talking about is making sure that there is that mandatory minimum as represented in the amendment from Representative O'Neill. So members, I would ask that you would vote with us to overturn the ruling of the Speaker. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Any further discussion on the appeal to overturn the ruling of the Speaker? I recognize the member from Hennepin, the Majority Leader, Representative Long.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I ask members to vote green and uphold the ruling of the Speaker. 4.05 is very clear. If there's an increase in the appropriation, then the amendment is out of order. And we've heard from members of the minority party that this would require spending. We also heard very clearly from Representative Pinto that if you have an additional mandatory minimum, that will require some additional prison time, and that will require more spending. And also would like to note that it is the custom and usage of this body that when we have an increased penalty for a crime, that increases spending, and so therefore we would need to pay for it, or it is out of order. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Is there any further discussion to the appeal? Members, before I instruct the Chief Clerk to take the roll, I will remind you that the question before us is, shall the decision of the Speaker stand as the judgment of the House? A yes or green vote supports the ruling of the Speaker, while a no or red vote goes against the ruling of the Speaker. The Clerk will take the roll on the appeal. Will the clerk please call the name of the member who is voting remotely?
Egbadje.
Egbadje votes yes.
Egbadje votes aye.
The clerk will close the roll. There being 70 ayes and 57 nays, it is the judgment of the House that the decision of the Speaker shall stand. There are no further amendments at the desk. The clerk will give the bill its third reading.
Third reading, House File number 42.
Third reading. Members, we are now on discussion to House File 42, third reading. Is there any further discussion to House File 42? I recognize the author of the bill, the member from Ramsey, Representative Feist.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I would encourage members of this body to support this bill. It makes important updates to our labor trafficking statutes and definitions to better protect victims of labor trafficking in Minnesota. Thank you.
Any further discussion? Seeing none, the clerk will take the roll on the bill. Would the clerk please call the name of the member who is voting remotely?
Agbadje.
Agbadje votes yes.
Agbadje votes aye.
The clerk will close the roll.
Is that clear? I thought the light went on. It went really quick. It flipped.
There being 127 ayes and 0 nays, the bill is passed and its title agreed to.